everyone, especially all the students and student organizations who joined ASAP for this. My name is Faraz, and I'm the founder and CEO of Allied Scholars for Animal Protection, or ASAP. Dr. Mills was indeed the first physician who joined the advisory board of ASAP. And for that, I'm forever grateful for his trust in ASAP's mission and our work. ASAP is a national nonprofit, and our goal is to support and empower our students to build a sustainable infrastructure in universities, to promote ethical, healthy, and environmentally friendly choices that benefit both humans and non-human animals. We also support students to choose impactful careers so they can continue to change the system in the most impactful way, even after graduation. Now, many of you hopefully recognize Dr. Mills from documentaries like What the Health. He's a very powerful public speaker and a passionate advocate of whole food plant-based diet for providing the best nutrition, health, and athletic performance for all humans at every stage of life. Dr. Mills graduated from Stanford University School of Medicine. And right now, he's a practicing critical care and internal medicine physician in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Dr. Mills also works as the medical director for the United States Census Bureau in Suitland, Maryland. Dr. Mills is the founder and president of Physicians for a Healthy America, which is an organization of physicians of color and other healthcare professionals. They promote the benefits of plant-based diet in communities of color and also support research, social initiatives, and legislative policy that are aimed at improving the health profiles of African Americans and other marginalized communities. In the past, Dr. Mills served as the Associate Director of Preventive Medicine for PCRM, or Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. In 2020, Dr. Mills gave a testimony at USDA Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee that went viral. He was calling out the committee for its historically racist policy for advocating dairy consumption for people of color, given the fact that there is a high prevalence of lactose intolerance in those communities. And I just end with the fact that Dr. Mills is a co-authored he's a co-author in a couple of scientific papers, such as one on racial bias in federal nutrition policy published in the Journal of National Medical Association. And with that, welcome, Dr. Mills. I know you literally just got home from hospital. You must be exhausted, but your passion for advocating plant-based diet is never ending. So thank you so much for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting me. And I want to thank everyone who is attending tonight, especially because I think with what we have just seen as a nation happen in the state of Tennessee, it makes it very clear that the change that we desperately need in the nation and in the world is going to come from the bottom up, and is going to come from students. And so I am really, really honored and excited to be here with interested and committed and energized students to talk about this very, very important topic. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I will say parenthetically, my only regret is that we can't travel at the speed of light, so we could experience time dilation to try and include more information that we're going to be able to fit into this 1 hour, but oh well, we'll do the best we can.
Thank you so much. There's indeed a lot of questions I wanted to ask you, but maybe we do a follow-up on this. I just want to point out that you're absolutely right. I'm so happy that there is a lot of students here, and because there are going to be eventually people who can change the system after graduation. So with that, one of the main questions that I have, which is the main topic of this talk, is why is pushing dairy on everyone racist?
Sure. So the reason that dairy is overtly racist is because when we look at the prevalence of lactose intolerance, the inability to digest and absorb lactose, which is the milk or the sugar, I'm sorry, that is in cow's milk, the differences amongst ethnic groups are really, really stark. So the prevalence of lactose intolerance amongst Caucasians actually averages about 30%, only 30%. But when you look at Asian Americans, it's 90 to 95%. Amongst Blacks and African Americans, it ranges from around 74 to as high as 90+%, depending on how much the penetrance of European genes within their gene pool. Amongst Native Americans, it's again 74 to 90+%. With Hispanic Americans, it can be around 53% up to as much as 90%. And again, that has to do with the penetrance of European Spanish genes into the New World Hispanic gene pool. And so the bottom line is that the vast majority of ethnic Americans are intolerant of lactose, which means that when they consume lactose-containing products, they are going to get sick. They're going to get ill. And that's because they cannot digest and absorb the lactose. And when it therefore gets transmitted down to their colon, the bacteria begin to break it down, and it causes gas, cramping, bloating. The sugar pulls water into the colon, which causes diarrhea, and it just causes all sorts of intestinal distress. And so for our government to recommend that people consume dairy products, knowing that it's going to make the vast majority of people of color sick, is flat out racist. And people are probably thinking, well, but the government is doing that because it's concerned about our nutrition. It wants us to consume the dairy products because we need the calcium, we need the protein. No, we don't. Dairy calcium has never been shown to help human beings build stronger bones. In fact, the studies show the exact opposite, that when you look around the world, those nations that consume the most dairy products have the highest rates of osteoporosis and hip fracture. Here in this country, the Harvard Nurses Health Study showed the women who consume the most dairy had the highest rate of hip fracture. And there are very sound physiological reasons for that. So the bottom line is dairy does not promote better health. It does not build stronger bones. And the really incredible thing is that scientists have known for almost 100 years that African-American women are genetically protected against developing osteoporosis in the first place. So they are being encouraged to consume dairy products for literally not even a theoretical benefit. And so they're going to get sick for no logical reason. So these are products that make people ill. They don't have any real health advantage, and they are associated with very significant long-term health risks, which I'll just leave that right now because you might want to come back to that later. So again, to intentionally encourage the consumption of foods that will make people of color sick when there's no benefit involved is the sort of quintessential definition of systemic and structural racism. And the pressure is coming not from nutritionists, it's coming from the dairy lobby and the dairy council and the dairy industry. It is entirely economically driven. It is not an issue of nutrition.
Thanks, Milton. I actually, it reminds me, growing up, I was not plant-based. My mom always told me drink milk because you need it for strong bones. And I always remember just feeling bad, but I never knew that this was milk. I just thought that this is how people normally feel. And something that I was really interested when we were talking once, and you mentioned that you were treating patients that come to you and they feel sick, but they just don't know it's because of milk. That was the moment that I was like, this is something that just everyone needs to know about. But you were treating patients, especially from minorities, right? That came to you and.
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier about the two of the scientific articles that I'm a co-author on. And in 1999, I, along with Dr. Neil Barnard and Dr. Patricia Bertrand, published a two-part paper called Racial Bias in U.S. Dietary Guidelines. And the provenance of that paper grew out of my experience working in the health clinic, in my health clinic. And what would happen frequently is I would have adult African Americans, primarily sometimes Hispanic Americans, coming in and they would say, oh, doc, my spastic colon is bothering me, or my irritable bowel is flaring up. And after taking a careful history from these individuals, it was clear that they were still consuming dairy products. And I was fairly sure that the problem was that they were having consuming products that were causing the intestinal distress. It wasn't that they actually had a defective colon. And so I would have them do a 2-week trial of absolutely no dairy products, come back and see me. And literally in 8 to 9 out of 10 cases, the problem resolved. And so I would explain to the patient, you don't have a spastic colon, you don't have an irritable bowel. The problem was you were consuming products, and I try not to call these foods because they're products, products that you should not have been consuming because your body is intolerant of them. And if you leave these things out of your diet, you will, the problem will go away and you won't have the intestinal distress. But the sort of denouement, if you will, came when this one African-American woman came back. She had stopped eating the dairy, problem cleared up. And I said with a sense of satisfaction, well, you're lactose intolerant. She looked me in the eyes and said, oh, I know that. And it kind of took me aback. And I said, well, if you know that, why are you continuing to consume dairy? She said, because the government says I have to. The dietary guidelines say I have to get X number of servings of dairy per day to remain healthy. And that's when I truly became angry as a clinician, because I knew what she did not know, and that was that the government knew that there was no benefit to her for consuming these dairy products. She wasn't at risk for osteoporosis. Dairy does not help build strong bones. And so they were encouraging this American citizen to consume products that were making her sick for no reason other than to put money into the pockets of people who manufactured dairy. And so I went to the group, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, that is headed up by Dr. Neil Barnard, and proposed to him that we do a scientific paper on the racism that is inherent in the dietary guidelines. And Dr. Barnard was 100% behind it. And so we did the requisite research, and out of that came the 2-part paper, Racial Bias in U.S. Dietary Guidelines. And that paper is available online, and I would encourage everyone to look at it. Part 1 deals specifically with the issue of lactose intolerance, and then Part 2 looks at the larger issue of how our dietary guidelines, which are heavily weighted towards encouraging the consumption of animal foods, promote excess heart disease, diabetes, cancer, strokes, and on in susceptible individuals.
Something that I actually learned from you was that the way that we just described lactose intolerance, because when we say that, first of all, it makes it sound like it's a minority issue, whereas like 70% of the world is lactose intolerant, if you call it that. But it also, so not only is the majority of people who have this, but also it makes it sound like it's a abnormal condition that people have versus sometimes I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I'm lactose intolerant, and I have to remind them that no, you're just normal. You're not. We all tolerate lactose as infants, as babies, but if our body, so we lose lactase, which is the enzyme that digests lactose, and we lose that ability because we're not supposed to have milk. And if that's not a clear indication for our body telling us we're not supposed to have milk, I don't know what is.
Can I stop you for a minute? Because that is an excellent and critically important point. And you're absolutely right that worldwide, the vast majority of human beings are unable to digest lactose, which is the sugar that is in milk, once they are weaned. But that's not just true of human beings, that's true of all mammals. As mammals age, once they are no longer suckling from their mother, they stop making the enzyme that allows them to digest and absorb lactose. Now, let me just get a little kind of nerdy and geeky to explain why that's important. Our bodies, our intestines are only able to absorb single sugars. Lactose is actually what's called a disaccharide. It is two sugar molecules that are joined together. And the only way our body can absorb them is to be able to split those two sugars into their individual constituents and then absorb them. Well, as infants, we all make the enzyme called lactase, which splits lactose in its two individual sugars, glucose, galactose. We absorb it, no problem. But enzymes are large protein molecules that are energetically and physiologically expensive to make. And so our bodies stop making them when they're no longer needed. And all mammals and most humans stop making the lactase enzymes once we are no longer drinking our mother's milk. And so that is, you're 100% right. That is the normal condition for all mammals and most humans. And it is only in a small minority of human populations where the practice of consuming dairy products started about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, that over time, those populations selected for people who had a genetic mutation that allowed them to continue making lactase throughout their lifetime. So actually, they're the abnormal ones. People who stop making lactase are the normal ones.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for explaining that. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, why is milk harmful, or is the problem just lactose? So what if, for instance, I guess one of the things for audience to know is like USDA is pushing or forcing milk in school. So all children, whether they can tolerate lactose or not, must have milk. So what if USDA comes up with this idea, which they already kind of hinted on it, to just remove lactose? Is that the only problem with milk, or are there other things in milk?
No, there are. The problem is the fluid itself. We've all been sort of, again, brainwashed, gaslit into thinking of milk as this either benign fluid or this universal elixir that is just, good for everyone. And the fact is that mammalian milks are species-specific fluids or chemical solutions that are designed for that species infants. So I'm going to show you a chart in a minute that will show you the differences between different mammalian species and what's actually in their milks. But just to make a point, let's say there's a family and they have a dog, and the wife is pregnant, the dog is pregnant, and they both deliver at the same time. But unfortunately, the dog, for some reason, dies. And so her puppies are there, and they can't get milk from their mother. And so the human mother says, well, you know what? I'm making more milk than my baby drinks, so I will nurse these puppies with the milk that I'm producing. Those puppies would die. They would die because there is not the right mixture of protein, fat, hormones, and so forth in human milk that could sustain those puppies. And that's because human milk is not made for a carnivore like a dog. There's a very interesting video making rounds on Facebook where it comes from the Chinese zoo, where there's a Labrador retriever who was used to nurse some orphaned tiger cubs when their mother rejected them as infants. And now, of course, these cubs are grown, but they still treat this dog as their mom because she nursed them when they were babies. But again, carnivore to carnivore, there was enough similarities in the milk to make the difference. So let me bring this chart up real quick, just to show people what these differences are. And choose this, and all right. So what people can see is that this chart is divided into a bunch of carnivores, and then down at the bottom you have two plant-based species, cows and humans. The main thing I want people to take away is that carnivore milks are much richer than the milks of the plant-based animals, and that's because carnivore babies are born at a much more immature state, and they're born very young, very immature, and essentially complete their development outside the womb. So carnivore milks have a lot more protein, a lot more fat. What they don't have is a lot more sugar. And the interesting thing is, of all of these species, when you look at the one that has the most sugar in it, it's human beings, right? Although human beings have very immature babies. Now look at the cow and the human, both plant-based species, and in some respects they have very similar milks. Essentially, same amount of solids, same amount of fat. Put an asterisk by that, but look at the amount of protein. Cow's milk has almost 3 times the amount of protein that human milk has, but human milk has 1.5 times the amount of sugar per 100 milliliters that cow's milk has. Why is that? That's because the brain uses only sugar for its metabolism, and proportionately, the human baby has the largest brain of any mammal. Therefore, it needs a lot more sugar. But protein is really used by animals for growth. And baby calves are, number one, about 60 pounds when they're born. And by their first birthday, they typically weigh about 600 pounds. And they're fully grown by their 3rd birthday. And so they need a lot more protein. And so not only do they have more protein in the milk itself, but the composition of those proteins are very different from the composition of the protein in human milks. They're much more growth stimulatory. Studies suggest that cow's milk proteins are up to 7 times more growth promoting than the protein in human milk. And people might say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is that it disorders our metabolism and over time promotes obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and other metabolic problems. And then lastly, even though the amount of fat looks almost exactly the same, the type of fat is very different, which is why you cannot churn human milk and make butter, because most of the fat in human milk is unsaturated. And that's why human breast milk has a translucent look to it, as opposed to that opaque look that you see in whole cow's milk. And so the bottom line is that milks are species specific. And in addition to the amount of these compounds, they also have hormones that are species specific. They have messenger RNA fragments in them that are designed to interact with the infant's genes to jumpstart its metabolism. And so I tell people, humans should no more be drinking cow's milk than they should be drinking the milk of a ferret or any other animal, because it's not designed for human beings, and it really does promote disease over time. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I just wanted people to see the marked differences between milks, that milk is not this benign fluid. It really is species specific. And, you know, if a person out here in the audience needed a blood transfusion and they came to me and said, Doc, I was in an accident, lost a lot of blood, I need a blood transfusion. And I said, okay, I got some cow's blood over here. How about if I transfuse that into you? Nobody would let me do that because they realized that, you know, that would probably kill them. Well, you know, ingesting cow's milk is not dangerous in the same way, but it is just as inappropriate because it truly is not designed for human beings.
Thanks, Milton. I'm actually glad you talked about the type of fat between different types of milk. Something I actually did before a couple of years ago, I worked in a pharmaceutical company. My job was basically to remove endotoxins from the drugs that we were producing. And endotoxins are leftovers of gram-negative bacteria, and you can't get rid of them with cooking and heat. And you can have something that is sterile, so no microbes, no live microbes, but it would still have endotoxins. But the thing is, as long as we digest endotoxins, as long as it's not in our blood, we are fine. But the problem is that saturated fat can actually solubilize endotoxins, and it takes it from our intestine to our blood. And our immune system really can't differentiate between live and dead bacteria. So it sees these endotoxins and it thinks we have infections. And that's how we get inflammatory reaction, which can lead to even heart disease. You know,
well, let me jump in and add this too, because people may or may not have heard advertisements on the radio for a phenomenon called NEC, necrotizing enterocolitis. And that is actually an allergy to cow's milk proteins that happens in very young babies when they're fed cow's milk. Their immune system recognizes those cow's milk proteins as foreign, and it actually causes necrosis in the lining of the intestine of these children, and they can actually have death of part of their intestines and end up with short bowel syndrome and other problems. Other children can have cow's milk allergy, which can cause intestinal bleeding, and that can lead to problems with anemia. So the proteins in cow's milk are foreign proteins, and they will cause health problems. Not everyone gets the same health problem to the same degree, but they do cause problems. And studies have shown that the proteins in cow's milk promote, as I said, heart disease, diabetes, and 6 decades out, they promote the development of colon cancer. And this is really important for African-American men. African-American men, there's a pandemic of prostate cancer within our community. African-American men are 70% more likely than Caucasian men to develop prostate cancer. Once we are diagnosed with prostate cancer, we're more than twice as likely to die from it. Number one risk factor for developing prostate cancer is consumption of dairy. And that is also holds true for breast cancer. And that is for both Black women and white women, that the more dairy a woman consumes, the higher her risk for developing breast cancer. And people might be scratching their heads going, why is that? And I say, well, how do you get milk from a cow? Do you just walk up to a cow and say, give me some milk? No. Cows make milk because they're mothers. They have to be pregnant. And if they are pregnant, their bodies are full of hormones. And every glass of milk is loaded with estrogen, progesterone, and cortisol. Anything made from that milk has those hormones in it. And so when women consume dairy products, they are consuming mammalian hormones that will act on their bodies and markedly increase their risk for a number of diseases, including prostate cancer, breast cancer, and colon cancer, as well as other gynecological problems like endometriosis, uterine, and even ovarian problems.
Yeah, I mean, when I knew about the cruelty involved in the dairy industry, and I always say I don't know if there is any industry that causes as much cruelty to animals, but really when I learned how in a very institutional manner it's like hurting so many people without people even knowing,
Right.
it really makes you angry. So thank you so much for sharing that. We actually had a question in the
Before
chat.
we take the question, there's one more thing I gotta mention, and that is all mother's milks have two jobs. One is to make the baby grow, but the other is to jumpstart the baby's immune system, right? Well, how does our respiratory tree protect itself from infection? How does your respiratory tree protect itself? What is the number one way it keeps you from inhaling bacteria, fungi, dirt, and so forth into your lungs and sinuses?
Nose, yeah.
Mucus.
Mucus.
It's lined with mucus. And that mucus traps the bacteria and all the crap, and it's either blown out or swallowed and destroyed by your stomach acid. Well, cow's milk markedly increases the production of mucus in a baby's respiratory tree because it's designed to rev up that immune system. Well, when children with asthma or anyone with asthma or sinus problems consume dairy, it causes an overproduction of mucus that will exacerbate asthma, exacerbate sinusitis, and markedly make those problems worse. And coming off of dairy can make asthma and sinusitis resolve completely. I have seen just countless number of patients who've told me that when they eliminated the dairy from their diet, their problems with asthma and sinusitis completely resolved. So I had to get that in there.
Actually, we had a question about, we are not jumping to Q&A yet, but because it's relevant, and someone actually asked, is it truly lactose intolerance or lactose allergy? For example, I had blood work done, which showed allergy to cow and goat milk, as well as whey protein. So it sounds like it's kind of both. People can have allergy and at the same time be lactose intolerant.
So the allergy is almost certainly to the proteins in either the cow's milk or the goat's milk. Because technically an allergy means that your immune cells are reacting to the presence of some antigen. And that antigen has to be a protein fragment of some sort. So the person whose test showed that, they were reacting to the proteins in either the cow's milk or the goat's milk. Lactose, because it's water soluble and it's a sugar, doesn't typically stimulate any kind of allergic response. Excuse me, it will just cause problems from the fact that it cannot be absorbed, and it will be broken down by the bacteria and cause problems that way. There's also a suggestion from research that the galactose portion of lactose, when it accumulates in adult bodies, can raise the risk for ovarian cancer and other types of cancer as well, because again, adult bodies shouldn't be ingesting galactose.
Something that I think is actually worth pointing out is that the inability to digest lactose, it's kind of our body's normal way to say that we're not supposed to have that. But for Caucasians who can actually digest lactose, I think a lot of times it's misunderstood that because we can digest it, therefore, they end up actually consuming more dairy and hurting themselves even more. Would that be accurate to say?
That is not only accurate, that is, again, a critically important point to make, that the ability to tolerate lactose was a mutation that conferred advantages thousands of years ago when calories were scarce during winter months and people had learned to use the milk of another species to get them through the lean times. Well, if the choice is between starving to death or drinking, the milk of another species, obviously it's better to survive. But the problem is that will create problems in terms of long-term health and increase your risk for chronic disease. And so even though you may not have problems with lactose, you will still have the issues with the heart disease, the cancer, autoimmune problems, and so forth. So even for Caucasians who may not be lactose intolerant, you still need to avoid dairy because of the prostate cancer risk, the ovarian and uterine and breast cancer risk. It is not healthy for humans, period.
Well, thank you so much, Milton. I guess we have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you in the last 20 minutes of this talk. So one of the questions we got is, what can students do about this, about like food injustice in general, and the fact that, a lot of times it's, students against $1 trillion industry, right? So they have the best PR, the best, advertisements, they lobby. Here we are in like academia, and so how can we really combat this problem?
That's, again, an excellent question. And the one thing I want the students out there to understand is you have more power than you realize. Again, going back to these scenes that we've just seen from Tennessee, the presence and power that those students had when they marched on their state capitol could not be denied. Now, that doesn't mean that they got the change that they wanted immediately, but they have certainly changed the game, and they've changed the conversation, and people are paying attention to the issues that they've raised. And one of the things that we hadn't really talked about, but that is very, very important, is the issue of the school lunch program. Because right now, the school lunch program requires that any student participating in the school lunch program has to get 1 or 2 cartons of cow's milk on their tray. Well, many students of color participate in the school lunch program because it's need-based. If you come from a poor family and your family can't afford to provide lunch, you are qualified to participate in the school lunch program. But it is patently unfair to students of color to force them to ingest cow's milk that we know is going to make them sick. And right now, the USDA does not automatically provide a non-dairy option for students who can't tolerate lactose or who simply don't want to consume dairy products. Well, there's now a bill before Congress called HR 1619. Please write that down. HR 1619, that is the Add Soy bill, which would require the USDA to have all school districts around the country to provide soy milk for any student who wants it, so that all they have to do is ask. Because again, many people don't understand the intricacies and of how the school lunch program works. The school lunch program is paid for by the federal government. And but right now, the federal government will only pay for cow's milk. So we need this law to be passed to force the USDA to pay for the soy milk so that students who don't want to drink cow's milk can get something else on their tray. And so again, that's HR 1619. Please write your senators, your congressmen, and tell them to support and pass that bill to get justice for children of color, so that they will not be forced to consume a food that will make them sick. Beyond that, I think that every student at every college campus around this country needs to demand that their food service department provide non-dairy options, again, for students of color and for students who don't want to consume disease-promoting animal foods. It's only fair. There is no reason that when students are essentially a captive audience, that they should be forced to consume foods that are going to create health problems later in their lives. So I would demand that food service make sure that there are non-dairy options provided for all of the things offered in the cafeteria, and that any business or any entity doing business on a campus, like Starbucks, have non-dairy options available at no markup. So what I mean by that, right now, if you go into Starbucks and you request soy milk or oat milk in your coffee or latte instead of cow's milk, they charge you an increased amount. It's called an upcharge, which again, that is unfair, it's racist, it's disgusting. In Europe, Starbucks doesn't do that. In Europe, Starbucks charges the same price for any milk put in their products. Well, there's no reason they're not doing the same thing here in this country, except they haven't been forced to. And we should demand that if they are going to operate on our campuses, that they provide these non-dairy options without an upcharge. So I think those are places we can start. We can make sure that we educate ourselves about the importance of adopting a lifestyle that is not built around animal foods, because it is not only better for our health, but it is clearly better for the planet. Most people, I mean, everybody recognizes that climate change is a huge problem, and it is putting this entire planet at risk. What most people don't understand is that the #1 driver of climate change is animal-based agriculture. The largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is raising animals for human consumption. And so that if people are really serious about stopping and slowing down and even reversing climate change, we have got to change our diets. We've got to change the way that we eat. And so we should do it for ourselves, for the planet, and obviously so that we stop visiting unnecessary abuse and misery on our fellow creatures who have feelings, are sentient, and experience the same pain and suffering that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to emphasize that we're going to send you a follow-up email. We're going to petition USDA and for everything that just Milton mentioned. So please take a few seconds to put your name there. We really want to have a lot of top universities asking their university and the USDA to make changes. And if you're a student and you're watching this with allied scholars, we have a very strong team that we can help you to work with your dining hall to push them to have better options, both in terms of sustainability, health. I mean, I guess the third one also animals. But I would say that a lot of campuses may not care about animals necessarily, but they would care about social justice and other causes. So that's a very good way of pushing them. And yes, please speak up and please keep talking about this and raise awareness. I know we have 10 minutes.
Can I also just mention to everybody listening, I put my website in the chat, Dr. Milton Mills, plantbasednation.com. And the reason it's there is because I have a number of lectures that are all science-based on the website that give the kinds of scientific support to all of the things that we're talking about, so that people can educate themselves much more thoroughly about these issues, so that when you talk to people, you'll have the sort of armament you need to talk intelligently and authoritatively about these topics, because this is all based on solid science. This is not, hocus pocus. It's for real. And I don't advocate anything that is not backed up by science. And I would also encourage people to check out nutritionfacts.org for another science-based website that also promotes plant-based lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of having these conversations, so students can be equipped with all the information they need so they can like defend it in the best way. So one of the questions we've got is it safe to say that dairy truly is the #1 killer in the Black community? I guess given the fact that top 3 causes of death, I guess top 2 at least are cardiovascular diseases and cancer, and dairy consumption correlates with both. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would not say it is the top. I would certainly say it is one of the top 3, because the consumption of red meat, the consumption of chicken, which is often perceived to be healthy and it's not, and the consumption of processed meats are absolutely right up there in terms of the promotion of disease in the African American community, as well as smoking. Smoking, unfortunately, is still very widespread in the African American community, and that is because cigarettes are heavily marketed to our community, and that creates a lot of disease. But certainly, I would put dairy as one of the top 3.
Thank you. And another question was, how does one counter the quote-unquote food desert excuse that a lot of times is brought up by people of color against veganism? The
issues of food deserts are very real. And a food desert is defined as an area where there is no place to buy fresh produce and unprocessed, plant foods within a 10-mile area or radius. And so that's a very real problem for a lot of people. And there are a number of ways that people have tried to address this problem. One of which is having pop-up farmers markets in these food desert areas, so that people will have access to plant foods. Another is educating people on how to use public transportation to access areas that do have better foods available, and just educating people on the importance of eating healthy. I mean, that's just the bottom line, because I don't mean to make light of this. I mean, I grew up in the inner city myself, so I know what these problems are, and I know that they're very real. But I also know that, the bottom line is this is our life and this is our health, and we only get one life. And, I often joke with people that in real life, there's no such thing as cartoon killing. In cartoons, you kill somebody and then they're back in the next episode. That doesn't happen in real life. When you die, you're dead. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we protect this one and only life that we have, but even more importantly, that we take care of our children and grandchildren who are looking to us to learn how to live healthfully. And so, yes, we will have to make extra effort, but we'll have to petition our city councils and our city councilmen to change zoning laws so that bring healthier stores and options into neighborhoods that where these places are lacking, and that they do innovative kinds of programs like pop-up farmers markets and so forth to make these foods available. I live in an apartment complex, and at least twice a week at this complex, they have a pop-up farmers market. So these things can be done, but they just take some organization, some commitment, and some work. But it's, we're going to put the work in one way or another. You either put the work into being healthy, or you're going to put the work into going back and forth to the doctor, to the hospital, to the OR. And so it's much better to put the effort into being healthy than into trying to recover our health once it starts to slip away from us.
Thank you so much. So we have about 5 minutes. If you could just answer these two questions, I don't know, either in 2.5 minutes or so. So do you have any preferred non-dairy milk that you think it's more nutritious or whatever? Of course, after oat, because I'm team oat, but seriously, if there is anything that you recommend, you think it's better?
The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition actually compared plant milks to cow's milk. And one of the reasons this House bill is the add soy bill is because it was determined that soy milk is nutritionally comparable to cow's milk in terms of the nutrients, the protein, and all of that. So absolutely, in terms of its nutrient profile, not only is soy milk comparable, I would argue that it's better because it doesn't have the unhealthy animal proteins and hormones that you find in cow's milk. But beyond that, in terms of which milks you want to use, that depends on what you want to use them for. And because when it comes to cooking, certain plant milks are better for certain things. So for instance, a couple months ago, I wanted to make some mashed potatoes, right? And I found that when it came to making mashed potatoes, oat milk, creamy oat milk, worked better than almond or soy because it had a heavier body, it had a little bit more fat, and it had a creamier texture. But some people find that when it comes to baking, almond milk might be a little better, or certainly almond milk works very well for like breakfast cereals and things like that. So I would tell people, experiment, see which ones you like, see which ones work better in certain situations for you. The great thing is that you do have variety. You're not just stuck with the milk from a cow. You got all these options out there, and you can do a lot of things with them and find something that works for you in a given situation.
So what I heard is oat milk is the best.
And a lot of situations, yes.
Joking aside, I think a lot of times when people talk about proteins, it really irritates me because I literally did my entire doctorate on proteins, and soy actually has complete proteins. But speaking of soy, another question that we got is there's a lot of information and suggestion that soy or soy products can be just as bad for the body, especially for women. Is there any truth to that? And we have 2 minutes. And then
I'm having a seizure right now, okay? Just so everybody knows that. I'm having a seizure. Because there is so much misinformation and lies out there. So let me calm down and answer this question directly and intelligently. All of the meta-analyses looking at soy consumption and women's health show that the women who consume the most soy have the lowest risk of breast cancer and other gynecological cancers. They have stronger bones. And I tell people, look at Mother Nature. We have a natural experiment that has been going on for thousands of years. When you look at China and Japan, countries that consume huge amounts of soy have been doing so for millennia, and they have lower risk of prostate cancer, lower risk of breast cancer, lower risk of all of the gynecological problems that are common here in the United States. But what's more important, they're also more fertile than we are. They have fewer problems with infertility. And importantly, none of the men are wearing bras. It's because phytoestrogens protect men against prostate cancer. They protect women against breast cancer. Don't believe the misinformation that is on the internet. A lot of that has literally been put out by the beef industry and other animal-based agribusinesses to try and discourage people from consuming soy. Soy is absolutely healthy to consume. It will protect you from disease, no problem. Eat your soy. Don't eat only soy, but make it part of your diet. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic response. I know we are right at time,
But we have a few more questions, and I think some of them are actually really important. If that's okay with you, we spend like
It
5 or
is.
10.
I mean, if people can stay, I can stay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So this question I think is actually pretty important, because something that with ASAP we are trying to do is to have physicians come to medical schools and provide plant-based nutrition education to future doctors. So Samantha is asking, I had a baby and would like to raise him 100% plant-based. I discussed this with my pediatrician, and they said that this is fine as long as you include egg and dairy. Another seizure, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. So, number one, it is not necessary to include egg and dairy in your child's diet. But what is important is that you not try to wean your child too soon. I'll send you a picture of that milk slide so you can share with the people who are interested. But one of the things that's really notable about both about human milk is that it's very high in fat. And the reason it's very high in fat is because babies have very small digestive tracts, and they cannot handle a lot of bulky, fibrous food. And so they need concentrated energy. And that's why there's a lot of fat in human breast milk. And in Western societies, women try to wean their babies much too soon. And babies probably should be breastfed for, or at least continue to consume breast milk for at least 18 months. And that, I mean, you can start to, I think it's safe to say you can start to introduce some solid foods after 6 months, but you should still supplement it with breast milk or a plant-based formula that mimics breast milk. There is a pediatrician, a plant-based pediatrician by the name of Dr. Jackie Bussey, B-U-S-S-E, out of San Francisco, who's done excellent work on this. Look her up online. She's got some great materials that can direct you in that, but you absolutely do not have to give your child eggs or dairy in order for that child to be healthy. Also, there's an author by the name of...
put it in the follow-up later.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna put it in the follow-up. But she has had at least 3 children who, from conception through pregnancy, through weaning, through toddler, and they're now like, you know, kids running around, and 100% vegan. Oh Jesus, I'll remember. And she's also written books about her experience as a vegan mother, and you know, again, all the way through. So no, you don't have to give your child animal foods. And it's really important when doctors tell you stuff like that, ask them for resources. When they say, oh, well, you're gonna have to feed them XYZ, well, tell them, you know, Doc, I really like to make sure everything I'm doing is science-based. Do you have any articles or resources you can direct me to that I can read that will help me understand this better? Because most of the time, doctors are telling you things and they should be handing you a roll of toilet paper right along with that advice.
Actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this person also, I think, continued to explain that a lot of times when I talk to my doctors, it seems like they're trying to follow the guidelines. So this is why it just continues to be a systemic issue. And they're asking, are there any efforts being made to change the guidelines in the healthcare system? I guess we kind of covered that, but if there's anything else that we can add to it, like in the big picture, how are we tackling this huge issue?
So one of the reasons I started, you mentioned that I started an organization called Physicians for a Healthy America. And one of my goals for that organization, I mean, it's just getting started, is to establish new normals, because most of the normal values that we have been taken from what's essentially a sick population, a population that is eating animal foods and therefore has blood work and blood parameters that are skewed because of consuming unhealthy foods. And we really need to establish what are normal values for a plant-based population, because what we will find is that they're very different from, or significantly different, I should say, from what you see in a population that eats animal foods. Like just, for instance, is that across the board, when people who are plant-based, eating healthy plant-based diets, they have very low white counts. And I've seen time and time again that doctors will say, oh my God, your white count is abnormally low. We need to work you up and make sure that you don't have a bone marrow problem. No, it's not that they have a bone marrow problem. It's because the level of inflammation and inflammatory compounds in their body are so low, they don't need a lot of white blood cells. Your white blood cells are like your police force. If you live in a city with a low crime rate, you don't need a lot of policemen. Same thing with our bodies. When we have a body that doesn't have a lot of inflammation and bacteria floating around, our bodies don't need very high white counts. And so you end up with a very low white count, and that is much healthier. So it's just things like that that we need to establish what is normal for plant-based populations.
I actually learned that was something that I first heard from you.
Breeze Harper.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, you know who I'm talking about, right?
I actually...
Breeze Harper, she's the author that I was referring to. Okay, I'm gonna do a screen share real quick, just to show people who I'm referring to. She's a PhD, and people can then go on Amazon and find her books. Breeze Harper, PhD. Look her up. She has several books, talks about her experience as a vegan mother, from conception all the way through weaning and child rearing, and lots of good information. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I'm going to stop share. I'm back.
But yeah, I was just saying that I actually learned that from you first time, that you were saying that the what we call normal level is basically for, the garbage that, the average person eats. Sorry, I don't have a better way to put it. And all these ranges that are considered normal. And the same thing happens in Indian population with iron levels, just because the same phenomena. Another question that I think is actually really important is that is cheese or sometimes yogurt, are they more harmful or less harmful than milk? And you see that a lot of people who are trying to go plant-based, but they, occasionally cheat. So what are your recommendations for people not to cheat? And what is the side effect of this cheating, even when it's, every now and then having a little cheese?
If you had a teenager and your teenager came home and said, hey, mom, dad, I want to smoke meth, but only on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Not a lot, just, occasionally. What are you going to say? It's okay to cheat on Wednesdays and Thursdays? No, I mean, if something is unhealthy, it's unhealthy. And it's best to eliminate it, because any amount is doing harm. So, and now there are excellent plant-based yogurts and some very good plant-based cheeses. And I would definitely encourage people to wean themselves off dairy yogurt and cheese, especially cheese, because cheese, it takes something like 10 gallons of milk to make 1 pound of cheese. And that means that you get all of the protein and fat that's in those 10 gallons concentrated into that 1 pound of cheese, which makes cheese much more unhealthy than the original milk. Cheese is actually the highest source of saturated fat in the American diet. It's even worse than red meat. So yeah, please wean yourself off. And it's you can retrain your taste buds. People often kind of, when you start talking about this, their brains start to short circuit, and they're like, oh, how can I do this? I love this, I love that. And I remind people, none of us asked for anything in the delivery room, okay? Babies, we were all born without preferences, without any desire for anything other than our mother's milk. Everything that we think we love and can't live without, somebody taught us to want and desire. And if you think back to the relationships you had in your life, undoubtedly there was somebody you used to date that you thought you couldn't live without. And then that person did something stupid, like put on a MAGA hat, and you said to yourself, why the hell am I with this fool? And you dumped them. And once you got rid of them, you fell in love with someone else, and you love that person as much or more than you did this previous person. Well, just like we can get over a dysfunctional relationship and get rid of a person who is not good for us, we can get over a dysfunctional diet, and we can move on to something that is actually good and that affirms our life and makes our life better.
Great answer. Before I actually knew about whole food plant-based diet, I became vegetarian, and during that period, I was consuming a lot of cheese. I actually went fully plant-based, even without knowing that there was plant-based cheese. But even when with that, when I love that you mentioned that you never cheat in anything else if it's like on another drug, just once a week or something. And to that, I also like to add that when you look at it as a form of injustice, whether contributing to injustice in a systemic manner for people of color and minorities, and injustice that to animals, cheating is not an option when you change your perspective, the way we look at the issue. And also, I also personally think that every time that we consume a little milk, a little cheese, we are contributing to normalizing this, as if that this is something that is normal, like as if like drinking breast milk of another species is normal and cool.
And it's not, right. And we only want it because we were taught to want it. And we can unlearn those learned habits. And that's the bottom line, that they are learned habits and we can unlearn bad habits, period.
There is also another question that I kept it for towards the end. One of the people of color in the group is asking, can Black people truly be liberated without them embracing veganism?
Can Black people be liberated without them embracing veganism? Oh, that is a philosophical question. I would say not fully and not completely, no. Because especially for a Black person who knows what abuse, mistreatment, tyranny is like, and also when we as Black people look at what our original diet was in Africa, which the diet of West Africans and other African peoples are almost entirely plant-based diets, contain little to no animal food and no dairy whatsoever. And we have a physiology and genome adapted to that diet. If you want to be healthy, if you want to be disease-free, and certainly if you don't want to become an oppressor and abuser yourself, you have to let go of this Western abusive mindset that looks at the world and other animals as objects to be exploited and used for selfish purposes. I mean, that is just a very sick and perverse way of looking at life and other beings that we all need to jettison. But I think it's especially important for people of color. We need to decolonize our diet and decolonize our mindset.
Fantastic response. Thank you so much, Milton, and for staying, 16, 17 minutes longer than what we were supposed to. Really appreciate that. I just wanted to quickly recap what we learned and bring it back why this is a systemic racist issue. because it really sounds like that, white people have some kind of protection, at least on the surface, against consuming lactose. And then they, it's labeled as normal, and, other people are looked, almost down upon, that they're like lactose intolerant, as if they have some sort of condition. And then the government is lobbied, and the USDA promotes the products that make people of color especially sick. And now this is just so normalized that, people of color, and basically like 70%, I don't even say minorities, but like 70% of population really thinks that this is how life is. Finally, that we have the power to change this, especially given the power that students have, both to do something really meaningful in universities, because I truly believe that the change starts from universities. And once students can understand the urgency of this matter, they can always pursue careers, become politicians, become lawyers that can change the system later on. And with that, I once again want to offer all the students on this call that we are here for you. That's the whole reason we are here. We're having this call because we want to change the system, and we want to support you and give you everything that you need to do to be as effective as you can, so we can change this broken system. And with that, thank you so much, Milton. It was amazing. I really enjoyed this talk, and I'm sure a lot of other people did too, based on the feedback that I'm getting on in the chat. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Faraz, thank you for inviting me again. This was absolutely my pleasure. And there's some things that we do in our lives that really matter, and this mattered, and I just feel honored to have been able to participate. So honestly, thank you, and thanks everyone for attending, and have a wonderful evening. And look, check out the website, check out those resources. You'll learn a lot.
Yes, absolutely. We'll send a follow-up, we'll send a petition. And once again, thank you for all the students for putting up the flyers and advertising this event. Really appreciate that.
All right.
See you soon.
Have a good night. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.